what I'd like to ask you first and foremost, because you're the first coach that I've had a chance to talk to personally since this announcement yesterday, can you just, as much as you can, take us through the conversations you had with your players when you had to share with them and all of you had to come to terms with the fact that you will not get the chance to play the NCAA tournament this year?
Well, first of all, thanks for having me. And, it was probably the hardest, worst day of my coaching career, only because we met at 9:30 in the morning. We were going to practice and go to the Big Ten tournament. And I said I had a meeting, and players were down because there'd be no fans in the stands. Girlfriends couldn't go, all the things that happened to a player. And yet we practiced, had one of our best practices. In the last 5 minutes of practice is when they notified us that the Big Ten tournament would be canceled. And so I had to have that announcement. And then 3 hours later, I heard I was on some conference calls, and it looked like the NCAA tournament might be canceled. So I tried to get my guys back before they heard it on Twitter, and I got them back here for a 4:30 meeting. At 4:20, it was announced. And I don't think people can understand when you're a senior. You've worked your whole life, and I look at Cassius Winston in the eye, and I said, the kid's been through a suicide. He's been through the death of his brother. He's been through so much, and he was really starting to round into something. And it was like I pulled the rug out from under him. It was very difficult, as I'm sure it was for every senior, every player. But the seniors, I get another day to coach. The other players get another day to play. But for the seniors, boy, this was devastating. And I, too, look at some of these guys that have had incredible years. Like I think of the Stevens kid from Penn State in our league. I think he came back to school, and one reason he came back was to try to have a better senior year and get to the NCAA tournament for the first time. He accomplishes that, and now he doesn't get to go, So for the Rutgers and our league, or Penn States that haven't been there in a long time, or Boston U, I just hope they still have selection Sunday, so at least those kids could feel like they did make the tournament like they deserved.
Yeah, Dickie V brought that up, the notion that perhaps they would still announce the brackets even though the games would not be played. One of the things that has been risen, we heard Gino Auriemma talk about it, we talked with Jay Billis about it a little earlier, is the notion that once things have calmed down a little bit, conversations can begin about perhaps just giving all of these athletes another year of eligibility, not just the men's and women's basketball players whom we focus on at this time, but there are so many of the spring sports where they will not have their seasons practically at all, the baseball and softball players and the gymnasts and the others. What would be your thoughts as someone who is there and as a coach and would understand what all of that would mean on the idea that perhaps we would give all of these players another year of eligibility?
Well, I was on a conference call with our own institution here yesterday, and all of our coaches, and we had our track coaches down in New Mexico, because the thing was supposed to start today, the national tournament, our baseball team. I mean, I don't know if people realize, but even for the high schools, there's kids that we would be going to watch this week that we might offer scholarships to that might not get a scholarship. There's some of those guys that might be pros in golf or tennis, and I'm glad you brought it up. It's not just a basketball issue. It's everybody. I personally agree with Gino. I would be in favor of giving some of those kids, now some of them that want to go pro, and that's their option, but I would be in favor of kids getting a chance to have another year just because it would be what's fairest for them. I mean, I've had kids that came in as juniors, not pros, and left as seniors as pros. And some of it, you look at we were talking about Shabazz Napier. He had the incredible run. I think it was against us. In fact, they beat us in the Elite Eight. He went on to win a national championship, and he went from a so-so draft pick to a top draft pick. So I think there's a lot of good that could happen with that. There'll be some complications, but for a one-year deal, I think Gino's right on the money.
Coach, when you think about all of this, obviously you're still trying to pick up the pieces here, but what conversations have you had with your peers about what's next for you all?
Well, I have had a lot of conversations. I'm on the NAVC board, and I have a lot of good friends. And Mark Few called me yesterday, and, we're all in a state of how do you react? I mean, was I one of those guys that wished in some ways we would have held off like the NBA and postponed it until we got our feet under us? I mean, our medical people nobody can give us any info that's as valid. Now, do I think we should played? Of course not. Not if there's any danger to us. But we had to react so quickly, and so many people. I even look at coaches who get fired because they never get in the NCAA tournament. A couple of those guys are in the NCAA tournament now, and how does that work? So I don't know. I'm more worried about the players than I am the coaches. I get to coach another year. Those seniors don't get to play another year. And it's devastating for a lot of them. I look at a team like Dayton. I mean, we saw them in Maui. They're really, really good, maybe the best Dayton team in the history of Dayton. And they're not going to be able to play for it. And I understand why. But if there's some way that we can make things a little better, I think we got to throw the rules out the door and use common sense and hopefully adjust.
Tom, I can't tell you how much we appreciate this on what we know is a really tough day for you. Thank you for the time this morning, and we'll talk again soon. Thanks.
Well, thanks, guys. I appreciate it.